All right, we'll get started. My name is Sarah Danziger, the Education Program Manager here at CPW, and if you haven't been here before, you're here for our Meet the Artist series, where we get to sort of unpack and see what artists are doing behind the Instagrams and the websites and the exhibitions. So get to hear what's really going on. We have one more next week, so we're in the second to last of 2025, and we'll be back in January with this series. We'll be 1 to 2 times a month moving forward. So hopefully you can make it out for that and see someone you really enjoy on the list coming out soon. One more announcement before we get started. Our Woodstock Air program, which is will be in its 27th year, the open call will be announced, or it has been announced. Our jury has been announced, and we'll be opening that portal on Monday. So please have a look and spread the word. Our Meet the Artist series is made possible by generous grants from the Arnold and Augusta Newman Foundation and the National Endowment for the Arts. So it allows us to meet here and to keep the doors open and keep it free. So thank you for that. Tonight's artist, we will be joined with Colin Beattie, who investigates the evolving conditions of existence for human beings in the 21st century, with a special focus on the creative labor of artists. Colin's work has been exhibited during Upstate Art Weekend and online with Lens Scratch. His work was published in 2025 edition of the Cape Cod Compass. Colin is an independent curator, and his recent show entitled Life Still received notices from the New York Times, Hyperallergic Musée, Surface Magazine, and the Chronogram. Very cool. The show featured 13 artists meditating on themes of crisis, anxiety, resilience, and collective healing. Colin's curatorial practice also includes focused study groups and interviews with artists. So hopefully he'll mention that and let us know where we can get in touch. Without further ado, as they say, let's welcome Colin up here. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Sarah. Yeah. Okay. Hi, everyone, and thank you very much for coming this evening. I want to start by thanking CPW and especially Marina Chow, who invited me to do an artist talk last spring, and find myself here speaking this evening. I'm not exaggerating when I say that the photography community in the Hudson Valley has been the greatest influence on how I'm using a camera today. I've met such a wide variety of artists with diverse approaches, all interested in sharing their thoughts and working together. These Meet the Artist talks at CPW are an amazing resource for people who are finding their own direction with a camera. So thank you. I need it. So I want to start here with my senior yearbook photo. It's one of the first images that I created with intention. The yearbook committee at my school allowed us to submit our own photos, so a friend and I worked out this portrait. I wanted it to seem like I was wincing, like someone was about to shoot the apple on my head. And what strikes me about this image now is just how self-conscious it is. It's making an ironic comment on yearbooks, photography, being a teenager. I'd never even heard of Susan Sontag, but media critique was just in the zeitgeist, and I was sensing that. After high school, I moved around a lot, living in Europe, Asia, Central America. My photos were a way to record where I'd been, a way to record how I felt while I was traveling. I made this image while I was living in China. That's my calligraphy homework taped to the wall. I spent a fair amount of time staging this photo of myself in bed, asleep, and I think it embodies a kind of distance you can create with the camera, stepping outside of yourself to really take in the conditions of your own life. I think that activity, the stepping back from life, carries an immense political potential. I made this during the first Trump administration. It isn't a self-portrait, but it's me pretending to be someone else, maybe a powerful man. My interest in creating political images was becoming more precise. And when I say politics, I think it's important to clarify that I don't mean the cycle of political theater that has become dominant in the last 100 years. By political, I mean my personal relationship with institutions of power and the way that they establish value. Art making is a practice where I assume complete power over my own life, and I try to recontextualize the values imposed on me by others. The work of making art is the process of creating new forms of value, new ways of thinking, and new ways of living. Which brings me to this, an image I made a few weeks ago. It's called Jogging, and I think I'm pretty happy to call this a self-portrait. The figure in this image has no skin, which speaks to me about the conditions of bare life, the vulnerability of a human organism that has lost the protection of political systems. I'm seeing so many ways that human beings have lost the protection of their political systems. It's possible there's always been some bad faith in the process of governance, but I think that paradox is becoming more apparent in the 21st century. This is how I feel about life in the Hudson Valley these days: exposed, vulnerable, frantic, possibly in danger. I'm poised somewhere between a cheap Thomas Cole poster and the weirdness of the 2020s, but I'm still moving, trying to stay healthy, trying to decide what to do next. So how did I end up at this point? That's the story I'd like to tell tonight. Let's go back, all the way back to the early 90s. Hacky sacking was very cool. I was in high school. I had this slogan on one of my t-shirts: "Nothing is cool." For the teenage me, the only real power I had was to decide whether something was cool or not cool. Major media entities were telling me that politics were cool. My information about the world was being formed by creative directors sitting around their mood boards, racing to signal how progressive they could be. National Geographic was telling me humans are working together and solving the world's problems. United Colors of Benetton was making ads that spoke directly to racial prejudice in America. This kind of thing was at the mall. It's hard to imagine a clothing company using imagery this intense in 2025. It's a really bold political statement, but it might also be a really cynical way to sell knitwear. For a teenager like me, pop culture really carried a sense that things were changing, and I could be part of a change. This was when the culture wars were really beginning in the United States. Politicians like Tipper Gore and Jesse Helms were building their careers by attacking the entertainment industry and public art funding, staging alarmist debates about decency in order to gain political leverage. Musicians were in the spotlight and trying to hold on to their politics too, organizing benefit concerts for everything from AIDS awareness to the Tibetan government in exile. There was an uncomfortable intersection between the power of mass media and the belief that mass media is a pretty unreliable platform for social change. Here's Kurt Cobain on the cover of Rolling Stone, wearing a shirt that says "Corporate magazines still suck." The musicians I admired were a huge influence on my worldview. I'd sit on the floor of my room, listening to music, trying to figure out what was going on with the album art. This is Mike Kelly's work on the cover of a Sonic Youth record, and inside there was a picture of people having sex with stuffed animals. Somehow these images had snuck into the mall. They seemed like a message for me to decipher, a clue to how the world really works. It's a big leap for a teenager to work out, but in hindsight, I still genuinely believe that that is true. These images were the tactical expressions of politically engaged artists. Mike Kelly's work is now celebrated for its inquiry into the personal and the political. The second image is from his collaboration with Bob Flanagan and Cherie Rose, who were both targeted personally by Jesse Helms during his crusade to defund the National Endowment for the Arts. There were a lot of movies about artists coming out of Hollywood. These films always seem to stick to a structure: drugs, sex, melodrama, loneliness. It had a real correlation to how I felt as a hormonal teenager, and I was in the movie theater for all of them. They were highly scripted, lightly eroticized, but these films were some of my first encounters with the practice of making art. Each film would have at least one scene set in the studio, messy places where artists spent hours trying to work out their ideas. It was a glimpse of a different way of living. I wanted to know about this. I wanted to know about art. Luckily, I found something called the Book of Art in my parents' basement. I spent hours with this book, which was published by an encyclopedia company. The Book of Art was full of photos. This is Jeanne Arp wearing a belly button monocle in 1926. And this is a portrait of Marcel Duchamp's alter ego, Rose Sélavy, taken by Man Ray in 1920. The Book of Art explained that these two photos were an example of how Dadaism was a protest against war, nationalism, and cultural conformity. I didn't completely get it, but the sense of defiance was clear, a bitter sort of humor, and that really connected with me. Looking back, there's so much value in this photo. Protest isn't always a statement. It isn't always easy to sum up. Protest might mean doing something risky, in private, like taking pictures of your friends. I followed those patterns into art that was made in my lifetime. Acts of public defiance, private moments of transgression. Political gestures that didn't immediately surrender a political message. Sometimes the message was stark, shouting the most inconvenient truth, like Barbara Kruger's "Money Can Buy You Love," or Jenny Holzer's "Abuse of Power Comes as No Surprise." Once I read that, I could never see it any other way. There was a direct continuity between the images I was finding in books about art and the slogans Kurt Cobain was writing on his t-shirts. It made me feel like I could be a little resistant. I could listen to my own ideas. I could listen to my doubts. I could ask myself what I really thought instead of what other people thought. I started looking for ways to make my own art. I bought a Nickelodeon photo blaster. An ironic gesture, it is a camera that was intended for 10-year-olds. It was a silly camera, but the photo blaster had a twin lens and a half frame advance, so I could take 144 images per roll instead of 36, and that really appealed with my teenage financial outlook. After high school, I moved to the UK for 4 years, studying English at the University of Leeds. I spent a lot of time traveling in Europe alone. I was sort of wandering around, looking for information, looking for something I could connect with. The photo blaster turned everything into an accidental collage. I was a pretty shy person, but with the camera, I felt compelled to push the rules, to push against the rules. I'd stop random strangers on the street in London and ask if I could take a picture of everything they had in their pockets. I'd make sequences of photos, like throwing poppies off the side of the Acropolis in Athens. I was very intentionally not taking pictures of the Parthenon, which was directly behind me when I was doing this. In 2003, at the Tate Modern, I saw a show called Cruel and Tender. The history of 20th century photography fell in my lap in a single afternoon. August Sander, William Eggleston, Rinneke Dijkstra, and so many others. I saw this show and I went back the next day totally immersed. In 2 days, I gained a field of references that were as powerful as anything I'd found in university. I was an English major. We spent a lot of time analyzing the relationships between narrative, power, and the economy from the 14th century to the present. Everything was fair game for critique, from works of literature to the landscapes of everyday life. Images like this one by Andreas Gursky offered me a visual correlate to everything I'd been studying. The hilarity, the horror, and the vast complexity of life under late capitalism. It never really occurred to me that I might study photography itself. I had no models for doing something like that. But as soon as I saw that show at the Tate, I bought a real camera, a student model Olympus from a stall at the Kirkgate Market in Yorkshire. I took it directly to a grocery store to shoot photos, and it's taken me 15 years to fully understand why mine didn't look like Andreas Gursky's. I went out with my camera, looking for deadpan rhymes in the world around me, like pairs of nuns as I was walking to school in the morning. A friend of mine watched me taking photos and said, you know, you're not supposed to just point the camera at things and take a picture. You're supposed to make a composition. But I was thinking of things like this. I'd seen this image by Mona Hatoum at the Tate, and it really stuck with me. A lot of her sculptures were huge and technically complicated, but this was just like a little joke, a quick experiment in the bathroom, and it was on the wall in a museum. The Tate was making a point with their curation. Photography is just another art medium. This is Gabriela Roscoe, who is a sculptor but has always made a lot of photos. This kind of work really lowered the barrier for me to think about my own photos as artwork. I had a camera. I had myself for a model. I was all set. I'd try to make my own work about the body, like leaving a handprint on my own skin after taking a bath, or playing with fake blood in the mirror. By this point in university, I'd actually been assaulted twice in different street crime incidents, so there was some real experience behind this fake photo. Weirdly, I thought being attacked was just an inconvenience that happened to everyone, like losing your wallet. So this photo is one of the only things I really did to process what had happened to me. It's just one image in a roll of 36 loose ideas. But looking back, I can see how the camera was becoming a thinking tool for me, more than just a machine that makes pictures. After graduating, I spent a year working as a teacher in China. I was alone a lot of the time, carrying a camera with me for entertainment. The region I was living in was undergoing a massive transformation. Everything looked like a construction site. In university, I'd been studying the ways economics might subtly affect my reality, but China was like a comic book for critical theory. I'd stumble into factories where there were more stuffed animals than people. I found a decommissioned fighter plane being used to decorate a playground at the park. The camera was a way to record these juxtapositions, just to prove to myself that they were real. The camera was something I could put between myself and what I was seeing, like this open-air yak slaughterhouse near Chengdu. The photos I'd studied at the Tate Modern were really the only context I had for moments like this. After living in China, I moved to Guatemala to work as a teacher for a year. And my photos from that time hold a real tension between an idealized place and the idiosyncrasies of globalization. Then I moved back to China to study in Beijing, and I shot pictures constantly, taking pictures of things that I thought were funny, like this guy who's a real telephone repairman patiently trying to find his way through all those wires, or this guy wearing hologram glasses at the noodle shop. I was looking for details that could really shift my perspective. This is a fire extinguisher in Tiananmen Square because so many protesters there have tried to light themselves on fire. Roland Barthes calls this kind of thing a punctum, an inconvenient detail that undermines the narrative. In Guatemala, I took a picture that felt like a step further to me. I found a hornet's nest with the shape of a human heart, and over time this image became like a personal symbol, an objective correlative to how sharp the world felt to me and how confusing. After years of living abroad, I moved to New York City. I had no contacts and I had no idea how to find my way forward. My first ideas were things like paddle a canoe all the way around Manhattan. After a while, I started to look for work on Craigslist, and that led me to a long series of jobs in the television industry. I spent a lot of time in places like this, working overnight shifts, eating Nutri-Grain bars. I was an English major who grew up without a television. Suddenly, I was so immersed in broadcast imagery, which is a way of seeing the world that just is so different from my own. I was paying my rent in Brooklyn, saving money, but it was a strange and hostile culture. I had no interest in fantasy football, so people thought I was an idiot. But I also thought they were idiots, so we'd sit there at lunch, eating takeout and arguing about that. The US was a different place from the one I'd known in high school. In the aftermath of 9/11 and the dot-com bubble, the nation was entering a conservative backlash to the idealism of the 90s. This was also in the aftermath of the subprime mortgage crisis. Everyone was faking it till they could make it, doing unsustainable gigs in the belief that real financial stability was just a few projects away. Doing gig work gave me an inside view into how large corporations create media products, and it gradually exposed me to some very harsh realities. For one, there's almost always a partition between freelancers who are hired for their creativity and salaried employees who are doing administrative work. This model has many advantages for corporations. They're shielded from paying benefits for the most expensive roles in production. Every creative exchange is stacked against the freelancers who are hoping to get rehired. And by forcing freelancers to compete for every gig, corporations pass the costs of innovation onto their contracted labor. They work with someone until their ideas run out, and then they just hire someone else with more ideas. There are many exceptions to this paradigm, I'm sure, but I mention this because I want to return to it later. Here's me on the night I won a sports Emmy for producing a short documentary about boxing, or for working at the Olympics. I can't remember which. My time with Marx and Engels made me a pretty uneasy fit for covering major sporting events. I was pretty quick to notice the forms of exploitation that are common in the creative industry, and I was too much of a smartass. It didn't mean I stopped trying to find gigs, but it meant sometimes I didn't really get rehired. No one I worked with was interested in my ideas, but I still had a lot of ideas. I needed to start listening to my own ideas. My wife had rented a studio to use for her painting, and I started spending time there on the weekends, making still lives with garbage and things from the grocery store. Having a specific space to work in and having to wait until the weekends made me slow down, spend time thinking about what I was going to do next. The slowing down was something I'd never done in my own projects when I was younger. I'd never slowed down with my own ideas. I decided to buy a really cheap suit and take pictures of myself imitating a politician, maybe a senator, maybe a president. This was during the first Trump administration. I was spending a lot of time scrolling through the news, hoping for some kind of sign that reality would reassert itself. I was looking for a way to engage with a reality that I didn't want to accept. I felt like it would be silly to think that I wasn't part of the problem, so I was also trying to find a way to do that kept me implicated as well. I thought of myself as a puppet or a cartoon. I was learning to control the studio, a tool with enormous potential for figuring out my place in the world. In early 2020, I'd just gotten married, and all of a sudden, the pandemic turned my whole life on its ear. My wife and I were suddenly living with my mother-in-law in upstate New York. I spent a lot of time taking pictures of flowers. After so many years in the city, they were just such a surprise. And also, with endless news about rising COVID cases, the flowers started to look like infectious organisms to me, growing and spreading in the spring light. My television work had completely stopped. I used my relief checks to buy a digital medium format camera, and the first thing I wanted to take pictures of was my laptop screen, my window into the outside world. I thought of it as taking pictures of the internet, like I was a tourist and I was wandering around in the internet taking pictures, finding images, cropping in on them, and shooting my screen in a dark room. I defocused the images with my lens to enhance the graphic quality of these newswire photos. I saw the blur as a way to connect these images with the history of painting. This is Larry Nassar, the doctor who sexually abused his patients. I started thinking of these as portraits to be added to the long history of how human beings abuse their power. I thought of these as grotesques or archetypes: the mountebank, the lecher, the villain, the fool. This is Harvey Weinstein, the producer who sexually assaulted his actors. This is Louis C.K., the comedian who forced himself on other comedians. This is the mouth of Roger Ailes, the former CEO of Fox News, who attacked the women who worked at his company. This is Donald Trump's signature. I'd say it looks like the fangs of a wolf, but I think that does a disservice to wolves. Philip Lorca de Corsia said that photography reveals things that are so obvious they escape notice. That mantra is something I've been thinking quite a bit about lately. I started spending periods of time studying specific artists, and one of them was Philip Guston. I had just moved to the Hudson Valley and I knew he lived here, so I decided to really take a dive into his work. And while I was learning about him, I discovered a series of studies that he'd completed in the late 60s and early 70s. he started painting simple objects that he had lying around in his studio: bricks, mugs, nails, chairs. After years of abstraction, Guston said he was looking for a way to engage his practice with the political mayhem of the late 60s, Vietnam and the Nixon administration. He said these studies were a way to bring his painting back into the world, to tell stories again. I like the idea that Guston could find a new body of work by studying simple objects. I wanted to find a direction for my photography, so I decided to follow Guston's lead and to see where it might take me. I was living in the Hudson Valley, and the objects that Guston was painting were pretty easy to find still. There are old bricks everywhere. I'd set things up in my dining room, trying to line everything up to make a photo that was mine, but also a pretty close copy of Guston's panels. I found some cheap boots on eBay from around 1969. Paintings of boots recur throughout Guston's career, carrying with them the air of violence. As a young artist, the LAPD's anti-communist brigade smashed up one of his first shows. Sometimes Guston's boots are splattered with blood. Sometimes they're just sitting there, waiting. Spending so much time with these small paintings helped me to see how Guston's simple arrangements held significance beyond their obvious forms. They were like hieroglyphics, like these two shoes that evoke a dead body stretching out behind them. Or the way a book laid open becomes something more like the Bible or the law or the rules I was following to create these images. A light bulb can stand in for an idea, or it can act as a witness to someone who's working alone. I made 15 of these studies in about a year. And I think my experiment actually worked. I believe this project did introduce me to a different way of seeing. Making compositions felt easier for me after I'd done this. I felt more connected to the objects in my frame. I started experimenting with ways to compress bigger ideas into my still lives. The little light in this window stood in for so many things: the isolation of COVID, the hope of being a new parent, the sense of having more control over my life than when I lived in the city. Or here, the idea that a photograph is a lie, or a dream world that extends beyond the edges of the frame. This is a photo of two toys, the handyman and the businessman. I was thinking about this tension in my artwork between the part of me that needed to think and create and the part of me that needed to compromise my beliefs in order to make a living. In January 2024, I took a leap by renting a studio, this time in Poughkeepsie. It was a huge step in committing more fully to my photography practice. My initial idea was to create a commercial portfolio. I enjoyed the challenge of aiming for the technical perfection I saw in commercial imagery, reverse engineering techniques from the work of photographers that I followed on Instagram. I would go to Target or Sephora and buy lots of props with my credit card and then return them when I was done with the shoot. Just like when I was a teenager, I was spending a lot of time at the mall, floating in a sea of commodities, looking for a way to express myself. But now I was equipped with this growing sense of the photos that I wanted to make. Around this time, I was invited to show my work in a small group show during Upstate Art Weekend. It was an exciting opportunity, but I wasn't sure what kind of work I would show. I didn't want to show work like this. These images didn't really feel like they were mine. I'd been really fascinated by artists who could manipulate the conventions of commercial photography, creating work that is both beautiful and bitingly satirical, from Paul Outerbridge to Irving Penn, Dina Lawson, Lucas Blaylock, Sarah Swinar, Charlie Engman, and so many others. I started dissecting my own attempts at commercial imagery, printing and cutting into my photos, rephotographing them, iterating them between digital and physical collage techniques. After a few weeks, I ended up with the first body of work that I've ever exhibited. I've been calling this series Hot New Deals Every Friday. I tried laying out all of my studio tools directly on top of the photos I'd made and then shooting them again. Gels, grids, dulling spray, florist's wire, things like that. Eventually I got to this one where I thought the image became more than that idea, more open. I named it Photographer's Table And I was thinking of this painting by Philip Guston, which is called Painter's Table. I'd learned from Guston how simple tools can become the building blocks of a visual language and an artistic narrative, and how the studio can become a world in itself. I've been taking a lot of photos of containers, but I started thinking of the photos themselves as containers. I tried cutting right into the photo itself, pretending it was filled with some kind of pure element. I was thinking about the magical glowing suitcase in Pulp Fiction, whose contents drive the plot, even though we never know what they are. I also experimented with actually cutting open the containers themselves. I had to work quickly in order to capture this gesture while the contents were still pouring out. It felt surprisingly taboo to be doing this with a bottle of soap, alone in my studio. I named this image after a painting by Haim Soutine called The Flayed Ox. Soutine spent days studying a whole carcass of beef in his studio, battling flies and splashing it with blood when he felt like it was losing its color. I like the parallel between Soutine's grand approach and my own tiny acts of transgression with products from the cosmetics aisle at Target. I also thought about the commercial photo as an empty promise. This wine glass is empty, but the image is so full. It's called beer and wine, but what it's offering is something else, something that doesn't make any sense. A glass of tennis balls and dish soap. The word beer instead of a beer. I was also trying to find different ways to get more of my tools into a picture. I was trying out shots where the studio is a red herring, lights that are on in the shot but aren't actually doing any work for the photo. I was interested in devaluing the subjects of my photos by cloning them digitally. What if there are too many products, too many cheap products, products that were never welcome to begin with? What if I combine the visual language of the grocery store with the language of home improvement? One day, a giant jug of vinegar caught my eye at Target. It was on the bottom shelf, an anti-hero in the product world. I decided I wanted to give the jug of vinegar the most beautiful portrait that I could create. I wanted to replace an object of desire with something abject. There's a real adventure to styling photos like this, catching bumblebees and freezing them in a jar, driving around with buckets full of wildflowers in my car, trying to get it all set up before everything starts to die. It's exhilarating, slightly crazy, even a little scary. Gradually, I've become preoccupied with the relationship between the subject and the background. In this piece, I printed out the photo, then cut a window in it. The subject is really lusting after itself, but it's also hard to establish which part is in the background and which is in the foreground. I sometimes choose my subjects pretty arbitrarily, so often what I'm trying to work out is what else will be in the picture. I started seeing the background as a space for commentary, a chance to show my own signature, my own toolbox, the books I've been reading. I want to load the image with information. I want to threaten the grammar of a photo without losing it altogether. I just really like the way these electrical tapes were packaged, so I structured the whole image around how they looked at the hardware store, but I wanted to make them naked and floating in the air. I'd initially been thinking this looked like a Donald Judd sculpture, but then I started seeing so many parallels with Baroque paintings of the Virgin Mary floating on clouds, surrounded by angels. Here's an example by Zurbarán from the early 17th century. Most great painters from this period have at least one version of this idea, the Immaculate Conception. It's a religious metaphor, but I imagine even Zurbarán would agree that it's also a metaphor for creativity. An idea just pops into your head out of nowhere, and now it's something you need to care for in real life. I'd seen my son make some pretty incredible arrangements with Mr. Potato Head, so I was working on a version in my studio when one of his ears fell down the mountain. The title just came into my mind, The Parable of the Rich Man. I don't really want to work out what the parable means. I like having it partially figured out. I want the viewer to work it out, or to work on figuring out the parable for themselves. This image is also a moment when my interest in the background started leading me somewhere else. There was only one cheap poster of the sky at the craft store, so I started taking my own photos of clouds and printing them to use as backdrops. I was standing in the parking lot at Price Chopper taking pictures of the sky, and this incredible long string of geese flew by. I printed out the geese and the clouds, and I used them as the backdrop in this photo. And I think it marked a moment when the Hudson Valley really started stepping into my work. We live in such an extraordinary place with such beauty, so many narratives layered on top of the landscape. There's such a deep tension between the idealized place and the various ways that it's been shaped by human beings. When Native Americans lived here, the Hudson Valley was already a highly cultivated landscape. Then Europeans invaded from overseas, planting apple orchards. In the 19th century, fungal scab diseases arrived here from Central Asia, making apples harder to grow. And then, first seen in Pennsylvania in 2014, spotted lanternflies are just the latest species to invade the Hudson Valley. I think I've started wanting to think of new ways to see the landscape, or finding ways to foreground how damaged it really is. This is a composite of maybe 25 different photos I took while chasing lanternflies all around my studio with forceps. There's a nice parallel for me between the way landscapes conceal layers of history and photographs conceal the work that went into making them. Remnants of the past still float around in the present. I was in the bakery at ShopRite when I saw this horse. I led it by its bridle up to the register and into my studio. My wife said, "Whoever designed this balloon did a bad job." And I agree with her. But in the afternoon light, the horse's shadow was almost perfect. I named this image after Sally Gardner, the horse that Edward Muybridge photographed to prove that a horse's feet all leave the ground when it's running. I'm interested in the relationship between horses and cameras, or horses and images. If you have a horse in the frame, it just instantly clicks with such a lengthy tradition of picture making. Everything else in the frame can be wrong, but if you have sunlight on the neck of a horse, like here, it almost pulls everything else into a semblance of narrative logic. The central form of this image is like a non-product, something alien, something invasive, maybe just some kind of strange technology. Maybe it's a fungus or a bad idea or a million computers working all at once to come up with a new ad for sneakers. I keep thinking about what it means to plant alien technology in a pastoral image, an intersection between something romantic and something frightening. So for the last part of this talk, I want to go back to my interest in the studio itself. This is called 18 jokes, not all of them funny. It's like 18 different still lives within a single frame. A friend of mine said this image reads like a salesman's sample board, a catalog of tricks that I can do in the studio. And I love that idea. This image could be about being a still life photographer. My current trajectory began when I took a step back from the photos I was making in my studio, paying attention to the work that I was doing to create those images, peeling labels, editing pixels. The work I was doing was something like the antithesis of contract labor. No client, no money, no results, just working with my own ideas. But at the same time, I think it's fair to say that what I'm doing in my studio is still part of the market economy. Art making is a form of labor, and artists are subject to the conditions of labor. I've begun to think about some interesting parallels between art making and the gig economy. So here's Sports Emmy Colin again to revisit some of those conditions. I talked earlier about how the gig economy benefits from making jobs temporary and competitive. The art world is even more competitive, with far less financial benefit on the table. The burden of innovation is on the shoulders of individual artists who invest huge amounts of labor in finding an approach that might win some notice. Open calls, juried portfolio reviews, residency applications, and competitive grants. Hundreds of applicants compete, and only a few artists win anything. Meanwhile, their collective creativity grants prestige to the institutions that host the competitions. I'm in no position to suggest that there's an alternative model for supporting the arts, but I think it's important to ask, how do these conditions of labor influence the actual art being made? One answer, and it's a partial answer, I think, is that competition engenders total individualism. There's a myth being created. If you enter enough contests, win enough prizes, you'll eventually receive actual money and renown. Emerging artists, therefore, devote huge amounts of energy and time to applications and proposals. And that means they have less time to listen to each other's ideas or think about ways to work together. I believe a model of endless competition erodes the tendency for artists to form networks, share ideas, and develop new directions. But I sincerely believe that the exchange of ideas is the real economy of art, even when those ideas bring no material value. For at least the past 1,000 years, it has been networks of artists, not individuals, who arrive at periods of great innovation. So with this in mind, I want to turn back to some of my recent curatorial projects. I want to give you an outline of the 2 shows I've curated so far and talk about how my ideas about creative labor are starting to inform my work as a curator. When I was invited to curate my first show, it took me a few months to come up with an idea. I knew I wanted to bring in artists from outside the local community, and I knew I wanted to work with artists who weren't already well established. I've been following Kevin Bennett Moore's work for some time, and when I saw Shweta Bist's work here in Kingston during Upstate Art Weekend, my mind immediately connected the two. There was something in their blend of humor and precision that immediately formed a group. Both of these artists were using themselves in their photos to create complex political statements. This is Shweta Bist's series that's called Shit I Do. Bist's art depicts the work that women do to care for their families, using carefully constructed collage to amplify the presence of economic forces within their home. She dresses her subjects in decommissioned Indian rupees, evoking a moment when India's government devalued several common banknotes in 2016, which destroyed the personal cash savings of many women in the country. These figures, elegant dresses, are made from worthless money, making a poignant statement about how the work of women within the home is undervalued by traditional economic models. Kevin Bennett Moore's work operates between fiction and documentary. Moore revisits and repurposes the visual language of the 20th century. The visual language of 20th century cinema. Here, a television flying through the air recalls the gendered movie cliche of the furious girlfriend who throws things out the window. But Moore is using it to express his outrage at the political crisis in the United States. In the smaller red image, called Satanic Mechanic, he paints himself bright red and fills the frame with his face, embodying both his own sense of anger and the robust American tradition of blaming Satan for everything from homosexuality to communism. This piece is called Big Star, featuring a background character from the 1902 film A Trip to the Moon, directed by Georges Méliès. In the film, a number of star-shaped visitors appear in the background, while the weary travelers take a nap on the surface of the moon. Moore said he imagined this character finishing his day of work on the moon, clocking out, and then going to a small karaoke bar where he would sing for the other space aliens. It's such a gesture of empathy, and I think it's also got a great deal of humor about the way we all actually live. This is a photo from the artist talk we held during the show's opening reception in Rosendale. I want to consider some things I learned while making this project with my earlier thoughts about the conditions of creative labor in mind. I follow a very simple model for finding people to work with. I keep lists of artists that I admire, and I write them polite emails, and sometimes they write back. It definitely doesn't work all the time, but it is a very non-competitive approach. Artists spend so much time in their own minds, sending messages out into the void, hoping for some response. I believe the goal of an art show isn't simply to validate those ideas, but to help, I believe that the goal of an art show isn't simply to validate the ideas artists have developed on their own. It's an opportunity for collaborative thinking, for building on the work artists do in the studio. My job as a curator is to figure out where an exhibition is possible, to draw people into the conversation, and to create a structure that encourages visitors and artists to think together. I believe the art world has a clear tendency toward hierarchies, but I want to use my curation to build networks and to create opportunities for others to share their ideas. My second show was prepared for Upstate Art Weekend in July of 2025, and it was held at ADS Warehouse in Newburgh. My idea for the show began with the thought that it would be a very hot summer, and a time when the second Trump administration would really be making its agenda a reality. I was thinking about the risks posed to human bodies by ecological and political crisis. I was thinking about human bodies in danger, but also resilient, adaptable. The works that came together had an interesting push-pull between figure study and still life, like this piece by Carolyn McAuliffe, a mother figure wearing a suit of armor made from children's toys. In these three images from the show, Hannah Altman tracks collective traumas through folklore into the contemporary world. Bruises that record the birth of a child, witch puppets who recall our history of suspicion and prejudice, and a private game in the woods with a pool of light that holds the possibility for new folk tales. This is one of 7 images created by Oscar Carlson by using his own photographs as an artificial intelligence prompt. Strangely, the image Carlson began with had no people in it, making this human figure an uncanny offspring of his AI experiments. I've been thinking about the human body at risk ecologically or politically. These images show a human body that might be in danger or might be finding refuge in this artificial environment. Here, a young man finds refuge inside of a river after learning that his father had recently died. This image was created by Caleb Stein during a decade-long study of people who share a swimming hole near Poughkeepsie. It is an extraordinary print. This is more than 6 feet wide. Something surprising was how many people looked at this and asked with suspicion if this image was made with artificial intelligence. This work is really testing the boundary between documentary and conceptual photography, but formally it is a traditional photograph, a single exposure capturing a real moment in the world. However, when it was in the context of so many other approaches to photography, people became wary of the reality within this image. Elizabeth Pedinati-Haynes' work opens up a different perspective on the world by playing with scale, recombining familiar objects. It's a boy sitting in a river, just like the last image, but this river is made of tomatoes. I heard many visitors asking similar questions. What is this? Is it a photo? What am I looking at? I think this wariness from viewers was my biggest discovery in the show. As a curator, I can shift the context around a piece of art by creating a new group for it. And in the process, I can spark a dynamic encounter between the viewers and the work. They might feel curiosity, suspicion, disorientation, but for a brief moment, they're really driven to form an opinion about the work that's in front of them. I loved how eclectic this group show was. Artists were drawing on Yiddish folklore, artificial intelligence, paranormal activity, declassified CIA documents, Italian horror films, queer anxiety, and climate science. The show created many small points of connection between so many different fields of thought. Freely combining thoughts from very disparate origins is something that only art can do, playing with ideas, developing them without expecting those ideas to yield any determinate results. I think that this work of combination rather than competition might be a way to reconsider where value lies in the process of creating art. It's a form of utopian thinking. What is possible? What is here right now that I haven't noticed before? And I'd like to end the talk here with the piece we saw earlier tonight, Jogging from 2025. I said this could be a self-portrait, but in another sense, I think this image might illustrate my current definition of utopia. On average, people spend 27 seconds looking at a piece of art before moving on. For me, those 27 seconds are my utopia, the window of opportunity in which I can operate. For that moment, while the viewer is calculating their response to a work of art, many things are possible and habits are less rigid. It's a space and a moment filled with potential. It's a place where a better world is possible. And that's the pressure I see in this photo. In the narrow space between the surface of the photograph and the real world pressed up against it, I see the figure of hope, running, looking around for how to continue, looking for where to go next. And then I just want to say one more thing. I'd love to answer any questions you have. And I just wanted to say, if you enjoyed this and you want to see more of my work, I will be sharing a completely new project on January 12th here in Kingston. It's called The Hot Dog Man Greets the Dawn. and is completely different from everything I talked about tonight. So leave your emails here at the front on the checklist if you'd like some more information about that. Yeah. Thanks, guys. Yeah. You want to like grab the, do you want to, no, you don't want to like, carry the mic.
Okay. Anybody? Out of the years that you've been taking pictures and working in different projects and things like that, is there a certain body of work or certain images that sort of feels like the most personal, like the most you, that you feel like centered in out of all of these different various images?
So question, I think just for people who are watching online, is of the body of work, the things that feel the most personal, that I feel the most personal connection to?
Yeah, I mean, like, personal, I just feel like it's
Not so sure I can even say that it definitely feels like there are differences between, I mean, obviously this looks very different from the stuff I was doing in China, but it honestly to me feels more like it's feeling more and more cohesive. Like I'm actually, it's like figuring out who I am by looking at this stuff again. So it's more kind of like the work exists and I'm figuring out, that sounds a little goofy, but yeah. I don't know. I feel very personally connected to everything that I've made and the curation. I mean, I think one of the most interesting challenges when I was talking with a friend about this artist talk a couple months ago, they said you should figure out how to connect your curatorial practice to the photos you make. And that felt like such a huge leap that at the time it didn't feel like something I sort of didn't have an easy answer for that. But I think in finding that answer, yeah, it all feels really connected for me, to me as well now.
You think your time spent overseas gave you in terms of perspective and like what you did, it looks like the inspiration that may have gleaned from living in some of these foreign countries.
So the question is what did I gain from living overseas for so many years? And then can you say the second part again?
How did that provide you inspiration or direction in your work?
Yeah, how did it lead inspiration to the work? It's a good question. I don't really know. I think that I was in my 20s and I think I made my life a lot harder by spending so much time traveling because you're alone. There's you meet people and you have friendships, but it's such a peripatetic lifestyle when you're traveling like that. I think I wouldn't go as far as to say that like it was traumatic, but it was hard. And I think that something about that is related to the work that I'm doing now, but I don't know if I could actually answer it too succinctly. And I mean, I think there is, like I said, there's this sort of stepping away from life that I think is a really powerful tool for thinking. And I think that traveling a lot, it really does give you so much, you have the unpleasant feeling of not feeling very immersed in any single place. But I think traveling like a ton of traveling grants you this sort of feeling of like everything seems a little alien. You feel like an alien. Everything feels unfamiliar wherever you go. And I think that again, it's not a pleasant experience, but I think it's a productive experience. That feeling. Yeah.
Could you speak a little bit more about the potential and curation of creating something that's new, other than the sum of its parts?
Mm.
You know?
So
it's like that third thing.
Yeah, I mean, I had something that I wanted to say in the talk that I never got to that was about this sense that when you do a show, all of the work that's in the show will never be in that space again. It's like a one-time, it happens once. And I think and I think also, even in preparing this talk, like I'm going back to the work that I had put together. And like when I look at the work together, like this sort of seeing this rhyme between a boy in the river and a boy in a river made of tomatoes. Like I didn't notice that until I was working on this talk, but I think so. It's sort of, I think that when you consider any work aside another work, you start to find connections between them that draw new things out of each piece of work. And I think so that the show is this, a curated show is this opportunity for those connections to start forming, and everybody goes in and brings so many perspectives. I had someone come into the show who's like, he would spend a long time in the show, and then he, like, as he was leaving, he said, "Sure are a lot of bananas in this show." And yeah, there were a lot of bananas in the show, and I hadn't noticed it until he pointed it out. So it was like kind of just like, I don't know. I think that sort of, that creating that network that sort of stays afloat for that period of time. It's quite a magical experience, this sort of moment. And you're like, I was trying to hype up the show on Instagram, and I'm like, this is a convergence of artwork that will never happen again. Even if the show is repeated, it's different. And I don't know, I think I've read and heard things like that before, but making my own show really made me experience those feelings.
For me, it's analogous to music. They're notes.
Mm-hmm.
Notes.
Yeah, like you're saying, like the work kind of forms chords together, or they sort of are there notes on a staff and they sort of make a melody. And yeah, I mean, absolutely.
Or strange harmony.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm definitely looking for strange harmony. That's interesting to me.
I enjoyed the show, and your lifestyle is great. Do you feel like you want to, what's your time split between curation and your own work now or going forward? Do you enjoy one more than the other?
It's really feeling like they're so mutually beneficial that all I know is I just got to keep doing all of it the way I'm doing it. It really, honestly, it's great to be doing this talk, synthesizing a lot of this stuff. I think my first real challenge was to realize how the work I was doing in my studio in Poughkeepsie did have a relationship to my contract work as a TV editor, and that because they felt really siloed. And then sort of like realizing, oh no, they're related, was this like, it really pushed me to sort of really figure out a lot more about what was going on in my photos. And then similarly, like figuring out this curation, how my taste in imagery is related to the images that I'm making. I don't know, it just all feels so productive, and it's really feeling like I have a list of photos that I really want to make. And then like shows, after doing this show this summer, I was like, okay, I worked on it for like 7 months, and it was like, and by the end I wasn't doing any studio work at all. I didn't mind because I was so excited about the show, but I sort of was wary to start another big project because I was like, I don't want that to totally derail everything else that I'm doing. So they do feel a little like there's a little bit of a competition, but I just think they're both like, I think making art is definitely informing how I curate. And I think curating is definitely, because my art is about the practice of making art at one level, I think it feels like an extension, I guess. Yeah.
And when did you begin, or when did you have this desire to curate other shows with other artists?
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. The question was, when did I begin curating? And I was just incredibly fortunate to have a friend who liked how I talked and thought about art, and I would talk a lot and really just like, he was like, hey man, I got my son's space is open. Do you want to do a show? And so it was just the first time I'd ever, like, the opportunity was offered to me. And then because I'm a little older, I didn't like just rush in immediately and sort of like allow the eagerness to make a show take charge. So that was, sorry, was the question, when did I start?
Yeah, just when did you decide you wanted to curate and put together other artists' work?
yeah, I mean, I had a friend, the friend was just like, you should do this. You should try this. And I was like, yeah, I should try this. You're right. And my wife was like, yeah, you should. He's right. And it was about a year ago. It was just, yeah, it was just early November was when the first show, with the two artists that I talked about was in Rosendale. And then at that show, conversations started that led to me making my second show for Upstate Art Weekend, which just seemed like a good target because I'm independent, and it was awesome to have a show up in Rosendale for 2 weekends, but maybe got 50 people through the space in 2 weekends, and great people, super interesting. But I was like, how do we maximize returns in a place where there's not a lot of through traffic all the time? And I think I've also been learning from talking with people in the city and other people during Upstate Art Weekend to sort of, gauge or moderate my own expectations about how many people come out for art. But I mean, occasionally I go to like openings in the city that are mobbed and it's like you're at Studio 54 or something, but that's not been my experience yet. I should say my friend is Charles, who's sitting up front here. Charles was the guy. He's an amazing influence. Yeah.
Are any of these works used like an editorial for illustration by ideas?
The question is, have any of these been used editorially? And no. I did shoot a portrait of a painter who I interviewed for a magazine that's based in Cape Cod. And I shot a portrait for that. So that was like the only thing. And that was like, I was kind of using my art history like interests to sort of try and create the opportunity for me to shoot the portrait. Like that felt like the part I was nervous about. So no one's called me to offer me an editorial yet. I would take any of those offers because I think it would be a really fun and difficult thing to do. But I definitely be interested. Thank you guys. Thank you very much. Wait, I don't need to clap. I'm sorry.